Welcome to East Wargaming and our inaugural Army Showcase. So my name is Richard and I've got with me Jason, who you've seen on the previous reports. And today he's bringing us a showcase of his amazing Iron Hands. So, well, we'll start first, but Jason, what's your history in Warhammer? Just the whole gaming universe?
Yeah, thanks. I've actually been playing for more than 30 years, so I'm dating myself, but I'm old enough to remember actually when Rogue Trader first came out, and when the posters were at the comic book store and we were waiting for the rules to drop. We were all fantasy battle players, so we had played the first couple editions, first few editions of Fantasy Battle, and then we saw this Rogue Trader thing coming out, and we thought, hey, that looked pretty cool, and we got started playing that. So it was back in the days of pewter miniatures, playing on the floor. That's how I got my start, and I've been pretty much a hobbyist and a gamer ever since, with just a small break when I was overseas in China for a few years. But yeah, that's pretty much how long I've been in the hobby, and really enjoy every aspect of it.
Well, the passion really comes out in terms of, you can see this army, and you'll see it yourselves when we do a bit of showcasing of the models, but you can see the love you have for what you do and the enjoyment.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that.
The question I'll have is, well, why the Iron Hands?
I have multiple Heresy armies. I have multiple 40k armies, but for me, the Iron Hands have kind of always spoke to me about their grim determination, their anger, their liberal use of cybernetics. Black, I'm a sucker for black. I know a lot of people don't like to paint black, but I have Black Templars, I've had Death Watch, I've had a lot of different black armies. So for me, all that together is kind of why I liked it. And then as you start to get into the Heresy lore, about what happened to them with the betrayal and the massacre at Isfahan, the Shattered Legions, and the whole story through the whole Heresy. I mean, all of it has just really appealed to me. And this was the second Heresy army that I started to paint, and I just really love the modeling aspect, the painting aspect, the fluff, everything. You know, I connect with it, I think, on a lot of different levels.
Well, speaking of the army, this is a relatively large force. I say relatively. How many points are on the table over here at the moment, do you think?
Oh, geez. If I had to estimate, I'd probably say it's about 6,000, depending on war gear and your HQs and all these different kinds of things. Of course, the points have changed in the new edition of the Heresy. Some of these units are not as not the same in the Heresy, of course. But yeah, I'd have to say probably about 6,000 is playable. Obviously, I can't get all of this into one force org, but I do have a lot of flexibility to play different styles, which is one of the reasons why I have such a large collection, so that I have that freedom to switch rights of war or different units, play for the fluff, whatever it is that I want to do.
Well, as somebody who's been on the receiving end of this army on multiple occasions throughout the previous versions of Horus Heresy, talk us through what you've got and why you may have selected what you've chosen here.
Yeah, thanks. As I mentioned before, I like all aspects of the Iron Hands, whether it's the hobby, the fluff, whatever it is. So I've tried to have kind of a mix and match of a lot of different things. And if you started with HQs, of course, I've got an Autech Moore / Ironfather Mini, who I think is also, you've been on the receiving end of him a few times.
I have. I can remember that.
I've got a Herald, which the banner was actually painted by a good friend of ours, Raz. So we'll give his Instagram information later. But if you follow this guy, he does amazing work, and I'm terrible at freehand, so he did the banner for me. So that's a Herald. I've got various consuls over here on the left. I've got kind of magnetized consul who I can run as a mortificator or a forge lord or a siege breaker, whatever it is. Master of signals. I've got a praetor on the bike with his command squad plus an apothecary detachment that's also mixed in there. So I like to use a lot of magnets to give me flexibility, where I can pretty much run anything in the HQ slot that I want. So that really helps out in terms of play style, or whether, again, if I want to play fluffy or narrative or whatever it is, it's all there.
Yeah. Magnetization is a large part of, I think, the hobby for us Heresy folk. Just generally, the ability to switch things out as and when we need to is more vital, I think, than other game systems for us. But we'll see how that goes in Heresy 2.0. But I myself also magnetize a lot. It's a chore, but it really pays off in the end.
Yeah, let's be honest. I mean, a lot of this stuff is Forge World, and if you try to buy every single unit and every single weapon option, then you're rapidly going to go broke. So that also contributed to why I magnetized a lot of things, so that I have that flexibility again to switch out. You know, if we come over to troops, for example, I've got quite a lot of tacticals. I've got a support squad here. All the plasma gunners are completely magnetized, so if I want to switch out to melta-guns or calivers, volkite, flamers, whatever it is, I can switch all that out. I've magnetized sponsons on most of the tanks, so I can switch those out or not use sponsons if I don't want to. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, I think it's useful for Heresy, and I think it's also very useful for your wallet if you take the time to do it.
Yeah, and so... Well, you were speaking of the sponsons on your tanks. You have quite a large armored spearhead, I would say. So what's in your armored spearhead per se for the Iron Hands over here?
Yeah, so I think Iron Hands, especially in the first version of Horus Heresy, everybody loved to play Head of the Gorgon. I was no different, although I do mix it up. So it kind of lends itself to a lot of armor. 2.0, they've kind of changed the way the Head of the Gorgon works, but tanks are still quite useful. So in heavy support for tanks, I've got, of course, a squadron of Predators with the sponsons are magnetized if I want to switch those out to heavy bolters or leave them off. I've got a Sicaran, a regular Sicaran, also magnetized. I've got a Venator over here. These little side covers on the side, I can pop those off and run sponsons if I want. Laser destroyers, Vindicator laser destroyers, always useful.
Yes, I've seen these.
Yeah. I've got the Scorpius, the Friend Maker. I've only got one.
That's why we're still friends.
I also have an Arcus in the pile of shame that I'm eventually going to paint up, and more Land Raiders because I really only have one Land Raider. I didn't tend to go towards the Spartan heavy lists, the Land Raider heavy lists. They were more just kind of, you know, one option if I wanted to do it. Javelin speeders, also very useful. That's kind of all the tanks, and then of course the rhinos. And don't be afraid to mix your rhinos, just while we're on the subject. I've got the Deimos version as well as the Mars version, which is all fluff appropriate.
Well, I was going to say, in terms of Forge World and what we call Classic Heresy and 40k appropriate, you do have a large mix. Your Predators themselves are the 40k variant, and the rhinos are both plastic and resin. Now, this was more a factor pre-Heresy 2.0, but now we've got the new plastic Deimos Rhino coming in.
Yeah, indeed we do, and I have some of those ready to paint up as well because I think rhinos are really good and you're probably going to need a lot of them these days. But yeah, I mean, you know, don't be afraid to mix things up. Like, I know that there seems to be a bit of a stigma with some people about what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate. I'm very strict about my own stuff, right? So I actually wouldn't have used the Mars pattern rhinos if there wasn't a fluff reason for it. But as far as your own armies, do what you like. I've mixed in some of the 40k shoulder pads. I've mixed in some of the 40k heads from the Iron Hands upgrade sprues, using the Mars pattern, using some of the 40k weapons that they say are not fluff appropriate. But again, I think as long as it's in moderation or whatever else, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. And even if your whole army is 40k based, I certainly wouldn't turn down a game. It's just not my style, but I'm not ever a gatekeeper on this particular point.
Well, you're right. It's each to their own in terms of how you want to paint them, how you want to model them themselves. The whole point of this hobby really is for us to have fun. So as long as that is the goal, I think nobody's really going to complain.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you look at our games or if you look at our group here in Malaysia, we're very fortunate that a lot of people tend to lean more towards the fluff and the narrative side rather than the let's try and, you know, bring the absolute best stuff every single time and kill each other, which is fun as long as you and your opponent are walking into that kind of game. But yeah, it is all about having fun. And, you know, the more Heresy players, the better. And again, you know, just because somebody used one piece of war gear that's not fluff appropriate, you know, why should that stop anybody from having a good time? Certainly won't stop me from having a good time, and everybody needs to save some money too, so yes, understandable.
That's true. Just no Primaris, please.
Strong feelings on Primaris. This could get a lot of comments. Yeah, you know, again, Primaris is not my thing. Pure 40k stuff is not my thing, but again, to each their own. And I think what we also value in our group is, you know, just show effort, right? Show effort. That's all.
Well, so you've talked about the tanks and you've touched on some of the units, but in terms of the walking heavy support, you've got quite an array here. So can you talk us through what you've got?
Yeah, I've got a couple Contemptors. So one is the Forge World version of the Iron Hands, and the other one is the plastic Derp Dread from Betrayal at Calth, which I converted over to be Immortals. Tried to jazz them up a little bit with decals and stuff like this, but let's just be honest, that model is not very attractive.
Functional, I'll call it.
Functional, yes. Attractive, no. I've got a Leviathan there as well in a pod. Leviathans are great. I mean, they're fun to play with. They're not necessarily fun against if your opponent can't deal with them.
I can vouch for that.
Yes, yes. And he's in a pod, which was great in the 1.0 rules, but in the 2.0 rules, I think it remains to be seen how viable pods are these days.
Yes.
But yeah, the Leviathan's also magnetized as well. So if I want to switch out the weapons, or I want to switch out the siege claw to regular claw, whatever it is, I can do that. I can remove the weapon options on either of the Contemptors as well and switch those out. They're just fun models. They're beautiful models. So regardless of how well they perform or don't perform, I just really love the particular models, and I like painting them.
Yeah, well, they're very Iron Hands appropriate per se. And magnetization, again, coming back to this, it's something everybody does for their walkers. So it's a very common practice, just again, because it's all Forge World, and getting different weapons options gets pricey if you're building one for each different loadout.
Yes, the new plastic Contemptor is brilliant,
yes,
to be honest with you, and I'm sure that's going to get a lot of people excited about using them at a lower price point. I have actually another one of the Forge World Contemptors to paint. Eventually, I would love to try out Fury of the Ancients, but that one looks like a very strong Rite of War in 2.0. And then when you combine it with the Iron Hands rules, it could be really, really, really strong. So, but I just love the models, and I want to paint up some of the new Contemptors as well as the Forge World one that I mentioned.
Yeah. And then in terms of the smaller walking heavy support here, you've got, I see 2 heavy support squads and what I call in Heresy 1.0 the bane of my existence, these quad mortars over here.
Yeah, quad mortars. Yeah, let's start with quad mortars. Yeah, they're really good, and they got a nerf in the new rules, and I think a well-deserved nerf. They're also faster to use now because you don't have all the individual templates when they're firing their version of frag. Mm-hmm. But they're just a very great unit, and they do a lot of work in anti-tank. Yes. And for some armies, not necessarily this one, but for some armies or legions that don't have the ability to take as much heavy support, then they definitely fill a role.
Yeah. So
I love those models. As far as the other, I have 2 heavy support squads. I've got some autocannons, which are now useful with rending.
Yeah.
They weren't as good in the first version, but they were still playable, of course. And then I've got missile launcher squad as well, and I like to mix things up. So you've got half of them with the underslung Forge World upgrades, and then you've got some of them with the plastics. And then you've even got a couple models in there where I found in my bits box some of the old resin over-the-shoulder missile launchers. But yeah, I like doing that, just mixing things around, making things unique, not having everything be the same static pose.
Yeah, I myself remember trying to amass enough plastic versions of the missile launchers from the 1 per sprue that we got, that it gets quite tricky to have a fully uniform unit. But that's changed now that we've got this full heavy weapons sprue, so guys looking to build armies now have a lot easier time with it, a lot cheaper time too.
Yes, thank you, GW. The new box set is brilliant. The new upgrade sets are brilliant. No longer do you have to beg, borrow, and steal to get your heavy weapons or pay a crazy Forge World price. So, I mean, yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, just to really round off the questions I have, of your force here, what do you want to add still?
You're never done. Anybody that tells you they're finished with their army, yeah, you're never done. And like I said, I love the modeling aspect of it, and I like flexibility. So if I wanted to play some weird Rite of War, I plan on adding units to do that. I want more Immortals just because the models are brilliant. We've already done a few games of 2.0, and they're quite good.
Yeah. Understatement of the century there.
Yes, yeah, they're pretty strong in 2.0. So I want to paint more Immortals. I want to add another Land Raider or 2. I do have Plastic Spartan that I need to paint. I won't go the route of 2 or 3 Spartan type army list, but I'd like to have a Plastic Spartan painted.
Well, I'm sure people will. Plastic Spartan's available for most, so we'll see a lot more on the tabletop, I think, in the coming weeks and months. But fielding 1 is affordable. Fielding 2 is kind of expensive. So 2 or 3, you're going to be sinking a significant number of points in your army.
Yeah, absolutely. If you play a big game, I guess that's okay. Or if you're playing a legion like the World Eaters, it's definitely useful to have multiple Spartans. But for me, it's not my style. But what I really like about the new rules is a bunch of units or upgrades that you may not have took before are now useful.
Yes.
So Seekers, for example, brilliant. Nemesis Bolters, my gosh. Vets, I'd probably like to make some more ornate guys to serve as vets.
dedicated vet units.
Yep. Heavy support squads. I have some heavy bolters to paint up. I probably want to do some Volkite, do one of every single one. Jet bikes. I don't have any jet bikes. Regular speeders. I mean, the list goes on, you know.
So basically, never finished.
Never finished, you know, never finished. And it kind of leads into the next point, which is the Iron Hands, the style that I paint them in, is relatively fast to paint compared to some of the other legions where you're doing a lot of, you know, traditional edge highlighting. You know, this is definitely very grimdark, very weathered, very beaten down. So if I want to add units to it, I can probably do a unit in 2 or 3 nights of painting. A 10-man infantry squad, I can maybe even do a single tank in an evening. So adding units is quite quick. I'm lucky in that regard.
Well, it's a lovely force, and I've seen this before and played against the vast majority of this, and it's a love-hate relationship I have with the Iron Hands. I love to see them on the table. I don't like to see them opposite me. But for me, this is what I'd consider one of the better armies I've seen myself in Malaysia and Asia and around the world. And it's a privilege every time to play against it. There's clearly a lot of effort and time that goes into this and a lot of passion. And this is one of the things that I love about Heresy and I love about the guys who play. We are in it for the fluff, so we do spend more time. We're not, well, Jason may be putting armies out faster than most people, but we're not looking for the biggest, baddest unit. We're looking for the fluff-orientated. We're looking to spend time to make sure things are appropriate. And to me, that is what Heresy is for me. Everyone's different. But I do love seeing beautiful armies on the table.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, again, I lean more towards the fluff, more towards the narrative, but there's really no wrong way to play as long as you have a gentleman's agreement with your opponent. You know, I'll throw down in a whack-style game if somebody wants to do that, but it's not my typical cup of tea. But yeah, you know, it is a passion project, and when you play with a fully painted army versus somebody with a fully painted army on a beautiful table, which hopefully you guys will see in our battle reports, it does add a different level of enjoyment to the game, for sure. Have I played against unpainted armies? Yes. No problem with that whatsoever. Do I paint or do I play with unpainted stuff myself? I try not to. It's just my thing, you know. But again, everybody to each their own. But yeah, I mean, when you lay the army out on the table, and your opponent also has a nice army, it's really a lot of fun. It really is.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that really rounds up the army showcase for the Iron Hands here. Unless you have anything further to add.
I don't know. Maybe we could talk a little bit about painting. You want to do that real quick?
Sure. Well, we can talk about the painting style. We will be bringing out with Far East Wargaming some painting videos, and Jason will be taking us through his painting schemes for the majority of the armies, but we can give a brief preview of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, as mentioned, we will have some tutorials kind of how I do this style, but in general, it's the concept of going bright and then washing down, which is very fast. You can do it with a brush. You can do it with an airbrush. You'll see that in the tutorials. The weathering helps to cover up mistakes, so that helps. And then I also try to splash in a bit of an accent color. So you see that in more liberal use of the white. You see that in Autek more using his clan's red color as an accent in certain places, bringing in blue. The red of the bases, you know, all of these things kind of bring some life to what is normally a bit of a boring scheme sometimes when you paint black. But again, it's really, really fast to do. And you can do it with or without an airbrush, which I also value as well, because let's face it, sometimes if you're only painting one guy or two guys, you're not going to bust out the airbrush and you're not going to clean it all up. You want to do something that's quick and fast, and so that's kind of the technique that I've applied to this. All of it can be done regardless of your skill level. And that's the important thing, because, I mean, I like to get painted armies out fast.
Well, that's the thing about the grimdark style. You talk about the forgivingness. It's very different from what you'll see on the box art, the classic heavy metal style. I myself am more of a fan of that because that's what I grew up with, and I find it very hard to weather to this extent on models I've spent countless hours painting. But it's a style in itself, and it does lead to a very cohesive and theme-appropriate army.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no wrong way to paint. I have heavy metal style armies as well, and I think my personal feeling is that some legions lend themselves better to that style, and some legions lend themselves better to grimdark and to weathered. I picked that for the Iron Hands because I just think it fits. It fits perfectly. But I'm totally with you, because the first time that I started weathering these models, my heart was in my throat, because I always thinking to myself is, oh my gosh, I'm going to ruin hours and hours of work. But it is forgiving to do, and it is easy to do, and you can always fix things. As the saying goes, if you paint, the only thing you can't fix is if you put on too much paint too thickly. You got to strip and start again. But for weathering, you can always go back and fix that. And again, it does add more interest to the army.
It does. It does.
Yep.
Well, that rounds up our first showcase for Far East Wargamers. So thank you very much, Jason, for taking the time to show us your beautiful army. We'll be bringing you some more of these as time goes on. Jason has more armies themselves, but we have some very good painters in Malaysia, and they will be showcasing their armies in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to drop us a message anytime. We answer messages. We can share tips with you, add your comments, like, subscribe, all that jazz. And hopefully you enjoyed this, and there's more to come. So thank you.
Thanks.
Try